The lockout marches on, and, this was supposed to be the week that spring training got underway, but no, that's not happening right now. But the good news is the players made a proposal to the league today. So what was in that proposal, and why did the meeting last only 15 minutes? We'll get into all of that next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide episodes 3 days a week until the lockout ends, and then we'll do 5 days a week, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, so check us out there if you have not already. And coming up on today's show, I want to provide the latest with the lockout. I was thinking, as I said, that little introduction there, that we're a show talking about the Giants. But because of this lockout, we've had to spend a lot of time talking about that because there's nothing going on with the San Francisco Giants. We also do, this is kind of random, but we've had a lot of prospect lists coming out, and ESPN came out with its, and it's one that we talk about every year. So I will want to talk about that later once we cover what's going on with the lockout. But the lockout is the big news of the hour, and the center point of that is that the players made a proposal to Major League Baseball today in New York. And the big headline is that this meeting lasted only 15 minutes, but we do have, reputable reporters like John Heyman saying that too much is made of the length of the meeting, the duration of the meeting, because apparently the players prefer to just kind of make their proposal and then let the league go think about it on their own. I think that makes some sense. Clearly, these two sides aren't having very productive kind of face-to-face meetings. They're not really giving and taking in a conference room. That is not how these negotiations have gone. So I don't know. I agree. I wouldn't necessarily read too much into the duration of the meetings, but I would talk about the substance. So what was the substance? Well, the big thing that we're hearing, this is all kind of happening in real time right now, is that the union, basically the big change that we're seeing so far is to the bonus pool. And the other big headline coming out of this is that the players increased their ask in the bonus pool from 100 million to 115 million. So just to kind of remind everyone what this is about pre-arbitration players. The idea is to create a bonus pool for them so that they can earn money based on merit. As it is now, if you're not yet eligible for arbitration, teams are allowed to just pay you the league minimum salary, which is around $570,000. So if you're not eligible for arbitration until you reach 3 years of service time. So before that, you're only making the league minimum. There is an exception. It's called the Super 2. And what that is if you have between 2 and 3 years of service time, every year there's a calculation of the top 22% of players in terms of service between 2 and 3 years of service. And those players are granted arbitration eligibility a year early, or they basically get counted as players who have 3+ years of service time. And then they get 4 years of arbitration in their careers, versus normally you only get 3 years of arbitration, 4 after 3 years, and then after 4 years, after 5 years. So anyway, I'm kind of making it a little more complicated than it needs to be. But the point is, in these negotiations so far, the players have been asking to reduce the amount of service necessary to reach arbitration from 3 years all the way down to 2 years. And then they've also been talking about adding a bonus pool for players with less than 2 years of service time. So this is a huge ask. I mean, there's a lot of players that fall into this category. I think last year there were about 200 players between 2 and 3 years of service. Obviously, like I said, the top 22% are already getting to arbitration. So it's about 160 players who the league is proposing adding to arbitration eligibility, plus a $100 million bonus pool for everyone before 2 years of service time. So anyway, today they made a big change here. And the changes they kind of gave on the ask of players reaching arbitration after 2 years of service. And now they're proposing for players to reach arbitration, basically an expansion of Super 2 status from the top 22% of players in terms of service between 2 and 3 years to the top 80% of players in terms of service between 2 and 3 years. And they also increased the bonus pool amount. But as I said on Twitter, this is actually a concession. Even though the bonus pool amount for the players in terms of what they're asking for went up from 100 million to 115 million, that is because they are cutting. This year it would have been about 30 players from arbitration eligibility because they were asking for 2+ years to reach arbitration. And now they're saying the top 80% of players between 2 and 3 years. So last year, that would be about 30 players. And so I made the point, if each of those players just made $1 million in their first round of arbitration, that would be $30 million because there's 30 of them. And so to increase the bonus pool by 15 million is actually a concession of about $15 million under those circumstances. And so that explains the increase there. So it is, on first glance, it's going to look like the players are suddenly asking for more, but by my quick and dirty math, it actually appears that it is a small concession. And that makes sense, right? Like, it would be a little bit unusual if they suddenly were just increasing their demands by $15 million. But it's worth pointing out the league has been nowhere near this in terms of what they've been offering, although both sides have fundamentally agreed to this new idea of a bonus pool for pre-arbitration players. So coming up next, we're going to talk about what the league has been proposing and how far apart these two sides really are as the lockout continues. So stay tuned for that. But first, it's that time of year that I've pretty much given up on all of my New Year's resolutions, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution because I actually enjoy eating them. Have you tried the Puffs? If you haven't, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. You might be asking yourself, okay, it sounds like a delicious treat, but I'm trying to eat healthy. Well, let me tell you this. Most Built Bars contain just about 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and they have 17 grams of protein in an average bar. So go to BuiltBar.com, use promo code LOCKED15, and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. All right, here we go. We are going to talk more about what's going on with this lockout, and as time permits, we're also going to get into the ESPN Top 100 Prospects list and talk about the Giants on that list. With this Giants farm system, their prospect rankings have become a pretty fun time of the year every year to see how publications rank them. Although I've said time and time again, I'll say it again today, that it's just kind of a fun exercise as opposed to treating these with as if there's any kind of precision to them. But it is interesting to see how the industry views these different prospects. So we'll talk about Marco Luciano, Joey Bart, Luis Matos, Kyle Harrison, and others. But first, let's just kind of wrap up that discussion about the pre-arbitration bonus pool, because that's pretty clearly going to be a significant part of this next agreement whenever it comes to fruition. So the players' change was significant, they're conceding they're not going to get players with 2+ years of arbitration to just automatically, 2+ years of service to just automatically reach arbitration. So they're narrowing that number of players who would reach arbitration, but then they're asking for a bigger bonus pool. What the league has been proposing is something entirely different in terms of the amount of money they're willing to put into the bonus pool, and then also the number of players who would be in it. The league doesn't want to change to the Super 2 setup as it is now. So just to reiterate, the top 22% of players in terms of service between 2 and 3 years of service gain arbitration eligibility. And then everyone with 3+ years of service time is automatically arbitration eligible as well. So the league doesn't want to change that. What the league is conceding is that they're willing to have a bonus pool for every player who's not yet eligible for arbitration. But the league is proposing a much smaller number. They're saying in their first proposal, they said $10 million into this pool. And in their second proposal, just recently, or in a recent proposal, their most recent proposal was a $5 million increase to $15 million. So as it is now, they are $100 million apart on the amount of the bonus pool. But again, importantly, the players gave ground, moving closer to the owners in terms of limiting the number of players who are actually arbitration eligible. So significantly, I want to talk about how would players get into this bonus pool? What players would be eligible to receive it? What is it based on? Well, they're both proposing, both sides, that it would be an average of Fangraphs wins above replacement and Baseball Reference wins above replacement. And we've talked before about why this is problematic and why actually the creators of these metrics on these various sites, because that's the thing, it's not an objective number. It's kind of a number that different websites basically have to come up with and make a formula to determine wins above replacement. Now, I love the number, but it should never be treated like a precise number. And we've given the example of catchers and how it's really hard to quantify the value that catchers bring to the table. There's a lot of things we still aren't able to quantify there, like pitch calling, for example. But framing for the longest time was not really incorporated into Fangraphs' WAR calculations, and recently they did, and it made a bunch of changes. Like Buster Posey's MVP season went from like a 7 wins above replacement season to 10, and so that's a big jump. It's a huge percentage of his WAR was just added on years later. So anyway, there's problems with that concept, but it is interesting that that's what they're discussing. The players want the top 150 players as averaged by Fangraphs WAR and Baseball Reference WAR to receive some chunk of the bonus pool. The owners are proposing the top 30 pre-arbitration players would be eligible for the $15 million pool. I don't really understand why it matters. Like, it seems like the players could just decide how many players should be eligible, and the important number is just the amount that the league is agreeing to pay. But $15 million and $115 million is they're very far apart. And then we could also quantify how far apart they are by the players asking for the top 80% of players in terms of service between 2 and 3 years to be eligible, and the teams asking for the status quo, which is the top 22%. So it's a big gap. It's probably close to about $200 million of a gap between these two sides on this issue. And this is just one of a number of issues, and it actually might not be the biggest one. The biggest one might be the competitive balance tax, the luxury tax, the CBT. And we talked earlier this week about it. Something that hasn't necessarily gained as much attention as it should is that the league is proposing harsher penalties for exceeding different tiers of the luxury tax. And that is a big deal because it basically would go from what we've been calling a soft cap to something more of a hard cap. I actually have a little table pulled up here. Thankfully, MLB Trade Rumors kind of pointed out and they made a correction that they were saying that the league is basically proposing the status quo with the CBT, but they are not because of these harsher penalties in the different tiers. So the league is modestly increasing the number for the first threshold. Right now, I think it's 210. It's around 210 million. After that point, you start paying a 20% tax on the first $20 million over the threshold for a first-time offender. And the second time, it's 30%. The third time, it's 50%. But if you're $20 to $40 million over, you currently pay 32% on those dollars. But the proposal now is for the second tier, a 75% tax on that money and a 75% tax the second year and the third year. And then if you're over $40 million over the threshold, the league is proposing 100% tax, whether you're a first, second, or third time offender. Used to be that it would go up the more years in a row you exceeded the threshold. But now the league is just proposing, bam, if you're $40 million over the luxury tax, you pay 100% tax on every dollar above that. Currently, it's 62.5% for the first year, 75% for the second year, and 95% for the third year in a row. But these penalties are much harsher. The second tier, by the way, as it is now, 32% for the first year, between 20 and 40 million over the threshold, and the proposal is 75%. So big increases here to the penalties. So the luxury tax would basically become a hard cap because, wow, I didn't even mention, in addition, the league is proposing forcing teams to give up a draft pick for exceeding certain thresholds. Not just for the first tier, they were at first proposing a third-round draft pick loss. And I think they dropped that, and now they're saying if you're in the second tier or the third tier, you would continue to give up a draft pick. The second tier, you would surrender your second-round pick, and if you're in the third tier, you would forfeit your first-round pick. So these would be prohibitive. Teams would not exceed these tiers, and so it would basically become a hard cap in baseball. Without a salary floor, there would be a salary cap, and revenues have grown in baseball, and basically the league is trying to cap spending and to increase it at a much slower rate than revenues are growing. And so it is completely understandable, again, why the players are not fans of what the league is proposing. So these two sides are extremely far apart because the players in their proposals with the threshold here are simply proposing, I think, the same kind of tiers. I actually don't know about the tiers, but they're certainly not saying draft picks would go along with exceeding certain tiers. And they're proposing raising the initial threshold to closer to 250 million, while the league wants it about at 214, which is just up by a few $1 million over where it was in 2021. So anyway, I know this is really kind of dense, but this is what the two sides are fighting about. This is what's keeping us from having spring training underway. And this is probably what's going to keep us from having the regular season start on time, because it is hard to see them reaching an agreement in the next 2 weeks, which is what would need to happen, or a little bit less than that even, for the season to start on time. So we are staring that in the face, and that's probably what's to come. So what's to come on this show? Let's shift our attention a little bit and just give you an overview about this ESPN Top 100 Prospects list. Where does Joey Bart rank? That's a big topic, and so many other key players for the Giants. So stay tuned for that. But first, football might be over for this season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information. And of course, eventually baseball as well. And we will be all over that on this show as we were last year. And man, there were some good opportunities last year. Over under on the Giants was 76.5. They beat that by 30 wins. And how about Gabe Kapler for Manager of the Year? Something we advocated that people bet on, and I hope some of you did. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet online, where the game starts. All right, as promised, we are going to get a little bit into this ESPN Top 100 Prospects list. This is done by Kiley McDaniel, who used to be at Fangraphs, and then he worked for the Atlanta Braves, and then he landed at ESPN. So kind of a well-respected industry insider here in Kiley McDaniel and a highly regarded prospect analyst. So his is one of the Top 100 Prospects lists that I often look forward to the most. And it's not a great one for the Giants. There's some bad and there's some good. So let's talk about the first prospect to appear on this Top 100 list for the Giants. It's Marco Luciano, and we've gotten used to seeing that. But normally we're seeing Luciano maybe in the top 10, certainly in the top 20 on people's Top 100 lists. Luciano, however, for this ESPN list, comes in at number 30. So that's a pretty big drop. And the first sentence of McDaniel's write-up says, Luciano was number 7 on last year's list, thanks to his rare combination of bat speed, raw power, and ability to get to power in games. His defensive ability was a question, but one you really didn't worry about. Luciano played shortstop all year, but he isn't sticking there. I'm projecting him as a decent third baseman, but others think he'll land in the corner outfield eventually. So he goes on to say that he crushed low A pitching at age 19, has goofy bat speed, power, and patience, but his 36 games in high A were worrisome when he had a 37% strikeout rate. And, you know, he was a teenager, so it's not really a red flag, but it points to what could be a problem he runs into at higher levels. All in all, the report isn't that different now than it was last year. We just have a better idea of his limitations as opposed to seeing him beat up on short season pitching and imagining where things could go. So yeah, again, take the rankings with a grain of salt. I know most of you do. Like, there are so many guys that prospect evaluators just don't get right. And it's really, really hard to know what a player is going to be at the major league level until you see them there and until they have a chance to prove themselves. And there are often can't miss prospects who flop. And so you just never know. But it is kind of a pessimistic ranking, and the idea that more and more we're hearing he's not going to stick at short. We'll see. The Giants are going to keep him there as long as they can. But, you know, if he does have to move to third base and maybe isn't even great defensively there, then it does hurt the value quite a bit. So we shall see. Only time will tell. So next on the list is Luis Matos, and he just continues to jump onto people's top 100s and move closer and closer to Luciano. I mean, Matos ranks number 42 here on McDaniel's list. That is not far off, and it's basically within the margin of error within Luciano. So I think some people think there's a case to be made that Matos is actually a better prospect, and that's an interesting trend here, and it's going to be a really, really fascinating season for the both of these two, and really for the Giants farm system as a whole. So the deal with Matos is he makes a ton of contact. He's got really good speed. He plays center field. He's going to stick there, and he hits for power. So he's just got a really, really elite combination of skills. And the question is, can he put it all together and maybe chase a little bit less? I think his ability to make so much contact has him confident to just kind of swing no matter where it is. And they'd like to see him, evaluators would like to see him be a little bit more patient and selective. So next on the list is Kyle Harrison, the left-handed pitcher, who just had a dominant 2020 season in the minors. The only kind of question was command. But he comes in at number 50 on the list, which I think is the highest we've ever seen Harrison, So like Matos, he's kind of shooting onto people's top 100 lists and moving closer and closer to the front. So I'm very interested to see Kyle Harrison's season this year, as well as all of these other guys. And that's the thing. The lockout may be happening, but the minor league season, as long as you're not on the 40-man roster, you're going to report to minor league spring training, and the minor league season is going to start on time. That has nothing to do with the lockout. So that is good news. If the lockout drags on, at least we'll have the minor leagues to cover and follow. So next on the list, Joey Bart, all the way down at 72. You might remember that before he made his major league debut, Bart was appearing in some people's top 10s and certainly top 20s, but he's fallen a lot. And so this is just another consistent write-up with what we've seen evaluators have to say, that there are red flags with Bart. But of course, we all know the upside, we all know the downside. So that's actually it for Giants on this list. Notice there's no Elliot Ramos. He is often someone who appears on people's top prospects lists, top 100 lists, but he's not here on this one. So anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Coming up tomorrow, we are going to do a mailbag, so look out on Twitter for the prompt. I will pose, the question on Twitter, and you guys can answer, and we will get to those questions tomorrow. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out tremendously, so thank you in advance, and thank you to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. Stay locked on Giants.